Today, we're going to talk about why the middleweight motorcycle category is the only one that really matters in today's landscape. Not because these bikes are always the most exciting on a spec sheet or the most impressive at bike night or on an Instagram feed, but because these are actually the motorcycles that excel in the real world. Look, beginner bikes can get old, leader bikes can kind of be overkill. I mean, yeah. Somewhere in between is the sweet spot, the category that delivers usable power, real excitement, and optimal value. You guys know I love optimal value. Let's break down why the middleweight segment does this better than any other category on the market and why for most riders, it's the category that matters the most. Let's get into it. Middleweight motorcycles truly shine in regard to real-world usability. Beginner bikes are great for beginners. They will lose their appeal eventually. It's just an inevitable truth. Anyone who says they've been riding for like 5 years on a Ninja 400 and still has no desire to move on is probably lying to themselves or to you. As a new rider, small bikes are a blast. You can be aggressive with your inputs without fear. You can go wide open throttle, bang through the gears, and feel like the main character in an anime series without risking your life. But after a while, that novelty just simply wears off. Having to pin the throttle just to keep up with traffic stops being fun and starts to be a bit annoying. Needing to upshift 3 times before you even see 40 miles per hour feels less endearing and more like unnecessary work. But on the other end of the spectrum, leader bikes or hypernaked motorcycles making nearly 200 horsepower are simply just a little too much for the street a vast majority of the time. And believe me, bikes like these are incredibly fun to ride. There's no denying that. They make awesome sounds, they make tons of power, and you love feeling like you're witnessing the hand of God, like you have all Exodia cards sitting right there with you. But they also require a lot of attention and restraint. Every throttle input requires deliberate intention. Every ride becomes a negotiation between your wrist and the tire's limit of traction. Your TC, ABS, wheelie control, they're all going to be working overtime just to keep your bike shiny side up. What, you thought it was your amazing rider skill keeping that 200 horsepower missile upright? It's the electronics. With 200 ponies on tap, you'll find yourself leaving the bike in raid mode just to survive the afternoon commute, knowing full well you're sitting on more performance than you'll ever realistically use. But alas, middleweight bikes land right in the middle. More exciting than a starter bike, but far more controlled than the chaotic nature of a leader bike or a hypernaked. They typically make between 80 and 120 horsepower, and they offer nearly double the power of a beginner bike with only a modest increase in weight. That extra power transforms the experience into what motorcycling should actually feel like, in my opinion. Highway passing is effortless. Your bike isn't strained, huffing and puffing just to maintain a decent speed. You don't have to wring its neck just to feel alive. You can actually roll on the throttle, feel the torque and big power of the engine, but at the same time, it's not so powerful that it becomes stressful to ride. Middleweight bikes let you be present. You can enjoy the joy of an engine without crippling fear. You can use a healthy amount of the throttle without entering, felony territory. They're exciting without being overwhelming, quick without being exhausting, and capable without demanding to be babysat by 10 different rider aids. For the type of riding that people do most, nothing strikes the balance like a middleweight machine. And it's why a lot of riders just kind of end up with one. It's kind of a final destination. Now look, if you care about engine character, layout, or feel, the middleweight segment is where motorcycles get very interesting. No other category offers this much variety in how power is made and delivered. It's basically an all-you-can-eat buffet of engine architecture, with each entree being delectable and unctuous in its own way. There is, of course, the humble, modern wave of parallel twins, which have become the backbone of the segment. The best of the bunch are around 700 to 800 cc's, making between 70 and 90 horsepower. The good ones have the 270-degree crank, giving them more of a V-twin style torque and feel. You got Yamaha's venerable CP2, Honda's new 750, which is one of our preferred favorites here on the channel, Suzuki's GSX-8 platform, and Aprilia's RS660, which in my opinion is really setting the tone. These units are fun, responsive, and flexible engines that make great power for the street without having to rev to the stratosphere. If you're more of a Euro-pilled masochist, KTM's Parallel Twins and the 790 and 990 Duke platforms are even spicier, though equally cantankerous, and prone to some premature wear. Then you've got triple-cylinder engines, and as a lifelong Daytona simp, I've got a particular sweet spot for the inline 3. You got Yamaha's CP3 from the MT-09 and R9 platform, which has really become one of the gold standards of this era. 890 cc's, 115 horsepower, 69 nice foot-pounds of torque, plus the aforementioned Triumph 3-cylinder initially made famous in the Yami household by the Daytona 675, still one of my absolute favorite mills involving 3 cylinders, but now living in its modern form in the Street Triple 765. Equally spicy, equally fun, get it in yellow if you can. These bikes, in my opinion, are the sweet spot of the sweet spot motorcycles, sitting between parallel twins and inline 4s, offering low-end grunt paired with linear top-end power. They rev, they have great howling intake sounds, and they feel and sound spectacular every time you turn the engine over. Then there's new players like the CF Moto 675 SS for the old broccoli heads, or Triumph's Trident 660 or 800 for the round headlight obsessed in the audience, and one would say tasteless. And somehow, the middleweight category still makes room for the classics. Inline 4s have yet to disappear completely. So if you want to pretend like you're in the mid-2000s once again, well, they've got your back. Bikes like the Gixxer 600, 750, and CBR 600RR still exist as holdovers from a totally different era. Screaming, high-revving engines that make their power at the tippy top and reward your commitment to fucking send it, bro! They're less common now, but they're still here, delivering an experience you really don't get anywhere else. I mean, motorcycling is kind of crazy in that way, right? We're still making engines the same way we did like 20 years ago, and you can still buy one brand new if you want to right now. And then there's the V-twins, or should I say L-twins of the middleweight realm, because it's really only Ducati and their current V2 power plant as the pinnacle of this category, powering everything from the Panigale V2 to the Street Fighter, the Monster, the Multistrada. It makes 120 horsepower, and while free of Desmos and the necessary Desmo service that comes with them, it still retains an unmistakable Ducati character. If you guys have been watching the channel since last year, you know this has been one of our absolute favorite power plants. It is so nice in the Panigale V2. Broad torque spread, great sound, a sense of occasion every time you open the throttle. And lastly, right when you think there's no way there can be even more engine types in the middleweight bikes, please stop. It can't be. I can't take it anymore. I've had enough. I've got one more for you. There's even huge, giant single-cylinder engines. Think of KTM's SMCR 690 or the Ducati's Hyper Mono 698. Now, look, you might not think these are typical middleweight bikes, being pretty svelte supermoto offerings, but their power-to-weight ratios certainly reflect a more intermediate riding experience. I wouldn't put a beginner on one of these bikes. They're going to kill themselves. Plus, these singles are nearly 700 cc's. That is a big old piston. Sounds pretty middleweight to me. With larger displacement and just one cylinder, these bikes make prodigious amounts of torque with decent power as well. They're certainly niche, borderline unjustifiable, but exactly the type of bikes that prove how broad this segment really is. If you value choice and options, the middleweight category remains unmatched. No other segment gives you this many distinct engine personalities, except maybe all these weird Chinese companies that are making like 400cc V4 cruisers and other oddball machines. We don't get those in America, so it doesn't matter. Now listen, riding season is nearly in full swing, which means you're about to endure one of motorcycling's greatest challenges. If you've been riding for more than 5 minutes, you already know this problem. You finally have a free day, the weather's perfect, and you spend half of the ride stuck on straight roads wondering how much longer until you get to the twisties. Let's get this bike leaned over, baby. Normal GPS apps just do not cut it for bikes. They're built for commuters prioritizing speed, highways, and efficiency, which is the opposite of what motorcycling is about. That's where Calimoto comes in. Calimoto is a sweet navigation app built specifically for motorcyclists. Instead of sending you from point A to point B as fast as possible, it actively looks for the most scenic, curvy, rider-focused roads and builds routes that are actually fun to ride. You can choose winding or extra twisty routes, avoiding highways, adding waypoints like gas or food stops, and even generate round-trip rides automatically. Kalimoto has over 250,000 curated motorcycle routes worldwide, all rated and shared by their riders. So whether you're riding locally or somewhere totally new, you're not guessing. You're riding routes vetted by other users. Navigation is turn by turn with voice guidance, and offline maps are available for when the cell service disappears, which is nice. There's even group ride functionality so you can share routes and keep track of your buddies in real time instead of losing Steve at every intersection. If you actually care about riding good roads, Kalimoto is worth checking out. Hit the link in the description, download the app, and use one of the codes on the website to get either a 30-day free trial or 10% off for your first year. Thanks to Kalimoto for the support. Now let's get back to the show. Now, listen, despite what nerds love to say online, you will almost certainly outgrow a beginner bike's capability before you outgrow your own skill, at least on the street. On track, yes, it can take a long time before a small bike truly becomes a limiting factor. But real-world riding isn't a closed course where you're either at 100% throttle or 100% brakes the entire time. Real streets have short on-ramps, impatient traffic, and passing opportunities that last about 3 seconds before the Dodge Ram starts smelling your blood in the water. On a little beginner bike, you eventually just hit a ceiling. You twist the throttle and that's it. That's all she's got. Running out of steam just as things are starting to get fun. You've figured out throttle control. Now the forgiving inputs are just painstaking. It is hard to continue getting better as a rider when a small bike just won't get out of its own way. A middleweight bike changes that dynamic. It gives you room to grow without punishing your curiosity. There's enough power to necessitate precision and tact, but not so much that every mistake risks catastrophic outcomes. Look, you're not going to randomly bank in 130 miles per hour on an MT-07. It's not like that. You can continue to work on discipline and judicious throttle input while not falling asleep behind the wheel, or handlebars as it were. A bike making about 80 horsepower will reward your growth and keep you excited about riding, which is really important considering how many people end up falling out of the hobby after just getting bored or complacent. Speaking of falling out of the hobby, we must now contrast this experience with that of owning a flagship sport bike, perhaps like this Aprilia 210 V4. I wonder why it's behind me. On these machines, unless you're very experienced, you're not learning or growing, you're just surviving. You carve out a portion of the bike's potential to exact a small portion of usability. Your growth is capped by self-preservation. These things are terrifying unless you really know what you're doing. Throttle is managed defensively. Rider aids become the crutch that keeps you coming home to your family at the end of the day. The bike is constantly 1 degree away from being way too much to handle. Middleweight bikes earn that long-term place in the garage because they age with you as a rider. They don't become obsolete the moment you can hold your own. You can ride casually or aggressively or somewhere in between, and there'll always be places to improve and learn. That's why so many experienced riders end up with middleweight bikes in their stable. It's not because they can't handle that whole hog 200 horsepower V4, but rather it's because they realize that they don't need all that to have fun. Middleweight bikes allow you to elevate your ability instead of stifling it with anemic power or just overwhelming you with so much excess. Now it's my favorite segment of the video. When it comes to value, the middleweight category has masterminded this equation. Motorcycles hit diminishing returns really quickly as displacement climbs. Every rung of the ladder results in more money for exponentially less real-world benefit. Nowhere is that more obvious than at the top of the manufacturer's lineup where flagship models live, awaiting their new well-heeled owners. Flagship machines, whether they're superbikes, adventure bikes, or sport tours, are built for a very specific buyer, someone with a lot of disposable income, a tolerance for excess, and a willingness to pay for features that they'll rarely, if ever, use. That's how some dentist ends up with a fully optioned out BMW GS triple black pushing well north of $30,000. Heated everything from your seat, grips, personal massager, radar adaptive cruise control, radar powered poor person detector, even wireless phone charging on a motorcycle. And beyond the features, the farkles, all that stupid stuff, the returns diminish even harder when it comes to power. Why spend over $20,000, maybe $30,000 for 200 horsepower when realistically you're never going to access the top 40% of that performance ceiling in daily riding? Most of that power exists solely as a number on a spreadsheet, with few people having the skill or physical space to utilize it beyond a West Texas highway. People wear their spec sheets with pride, man. I see it all the time. My bike makes 204 horsepower, while your bike makes just 198. But really, how often does Dan Yeti Cooler take his Ducati to the track? Probably never. Middleweight bikes, on the other hand, they hit the sweet spot for value. They've benefited massively from tech trickle down without inheriting flagship price tags. Most modern middleweight bikes are coming standard nowadays with quick shifters, pretty good traction control, ABS, and in some cases, like the new R7, they've even got full-blown IMUs. You get TFT displays to access ride modes or dial in preferred ride control settings. It's not always necessary, but it's nice to have. And unlike beginner bikes and their no-name in-house J1 parts, many middleweight bikes come with some pretty serious hardware from the factory, like Showa or KYB suspension or Brembo or Nissan brake calipers. And the best part is that the prices for these bikes are still pretty sane and attainable. Middleweight bikes are designed to appeal to riders who care about quality and performance but still live in the real world. I mean, a brand spanking new MT-09 is less than 10 grand. That is so much bike for the money. With power averaging between 90 and 120 horsepower, as prices spanning pretty wide from $8,000 to $15,000, these bikes often deliver the best dollar per horsepower value in motorcycling. In our opinion, the MT-09 SP is the crown jewel of the category. For around $12,700, you get an 890cc triple, fully adjustable suspension front and rear, including an Öhlins shock, up and down quick shifter, 6-axis IMU, real hardware and performance at a price that doesn't feel insulting. And that's a bike that's going to run forever. And it's not alone in this category. This segment is full of bikes that optimize fun, usability, and performance per dollar better than anything else on the market. Look, at the end of the day, the middleweight segment isn't just for lame nerds or broke boys who are just settling or they can't afford the big dog bike or they're scared of the V4. It's for people who choose bikes that actually make sense to live with, grow with, and enjoy long term. They're fast enough to excite and forgiving enough to tolerate daily. We all know the story of Goldilocks, right? These bikes are too small, these bikes are too big, but these motorcycles are just right. Why complicate it any more than that when Homegirl already explained it like ages ago? Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I will catch you next time. Fact: if you had a bathtub big enough, Saturn could theoretically float in water. Goodbye.